subcommittee, and I think we're waiting for one more city council, Councilor Mendonça, but he's not here yet, and we have quite a few items that have been referred to this subcommittee over the last couple of months. So we'd like to begin to proceed with the presentation. So, Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilor Elliott.
Here.
Councilor Broderick.
Here.
Councilor Mendonça, 2 present, 1 absent.
2 present, thank you. So without any further delay, Mr. Moses or Mr. Manager, we have tax assessments, we have tax bills, we have FY 2011 budget, snow and ice, a number of items. So why don't we go right to you, and in whatever order is preferable, we can have a discussion on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you pointed out, we have a number of items that we can talk about here tonight. The initial impetus, I think, is talking about the fiscal year 11 situation, and looking at it really from two points of view. One is there was questions raised regarding the tax bills that went out in December. As you know, those tax bills were a result of the budget that was passed last May, and the calculations really on what the tax bills turn out to be are really a function of the amount that we appropriate in the budget that's done in May, and then the values that we receive when the Department of Revenue approves them in the fall, and then the calculation made from all of that with the council vote regarding classification. Oftentimes there's some misunderstanding that somehow the tax bill or tax rate is set in December, but in fact all those decisions are made much earlier. But people get their tax bills in December, and that's the first real tax bill they receive. The first 2 tax bills are estimated bills, and sometimes that's a little misleading to people as to what exactly happens with that. But I think there was a good question raised, and one that we try to address each year over the last several years, in terms of what the distribution has been in terms of changes in the tax bill by different classes and in various ranges. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Mr. Moses to walk you through. He's been doing these charts for 3 or 4 years now that show you how that distribution occurs and how the burden moves around from year to year based upon values, and we'll give you a sense of some of that.
Okay, as the manager said, the original purpose of this meeting went way back to when the original tax bills went out. I've taken a look at each residential class of properties, single family, 2-family, 3-family, and 4-family and above tax bills, and I've attempted to make some analysis of the distribution of how those tax bills change. Some of this is very easy to understand, very visual, and some of it is somewhat more complex, so if you feel like you have any questions, don't hesitate to break in and stop me. Okay? The first chart we'll look at is single-family homes. It's actually kind of a nice bell chart with a fairly uniform curve. Most of the single-family tax bills went up in the range of $100, $125, $150, with a nice, as I said, bell curve that tailed off. Very few went down below $100, a reduction. Very few increased more than $275. But that's single-family homes. Single-family homes did fairly well relative to the other classes of properties. Now, the next chart you'll see is 2-family. I want you to notice where that bell is positioned over toward the right of the scale as actually the next one is condominiums, I'm sorry. Condominiums is not a traditional bell chart because it's got much more localized variation. A lot of this depends on neighborhood. A A lot of it depends on the size and the type of the condominium. We'll get into this a little bit more later, but as you can see, the vast majority of the condominiums went up in the $0 to $75 a month. A few way on the extreme right of the scale and a few on the extreme left, but they're really concentrated in the middle. The third chart is two-family, and this is also a nice traditional bell chart, but if you compare this to the single-family, the peak of the bell is much more toward the center of the chart. In fact, the median increase was about $0 to $25, with a large percentage of two families actually going down in their tax bill from 2010 to 2011. If you remember, in 2010, we had quite the opposite. Two families did very well, and I think there's somewhat of a correction of the market going on here. The next chart shows three families, and now you see the bell way over on the right-hand scale. The vast majority of three families went up considerably. Now, this is also a correction for last year. In 2010, almost all the three families actually declined. So again, we're seeing a correction between two and three families from 2010 to 2011. The next chart shows the 4+ unit. Again, now you're seeing the bell over to the left-hand side. Again, vast majority actually decreasing. Tax bills have gone down. But this chart has what appears to be two very strange lines on the ends. But if you'll think about this for a second, and this is where it gets a little complex, this chart is in $25 increments. Quite a few of these are 4, 5, 6 unit buildings. They're going to be clustered in a very small range. But you have 100 unit, 120 unit buildings here. It takes a very, very small percentage change to change those tax bills, thousands of dollars. Those are the outliers on the bars here. Those are the very big apartment complexes, apartment complexes. So, you know, something with 20, 25, 30, 40 units, tax bill is going to go up by over $500, and that's this bar.
If I may, I believe if we go back, Tom was giving a good sort of comparison to 2010 and 2011 regarding the condominiums or the two families and the three families. I think the four families, my recollection is that those actually went down last year as well. So that's just a continuation of that trend, that the 4+ units have really have pretty much stayed the same, and so they or dropped a little bit in value, and so they're seeing smaller increases or actually decreases in some cases.
The next table actually summarizes what we've seen. It's labeled winners and losers, and it goes to each of the 5 charts we saw: single family, condo, 2-family, 3-family, and 4+ family. Focusing on the decrease, this is the percentage of properties that had a decrease in the bill from 2010 to 2011. You'll see that over half of the 2 families and almost 3/4 of the 4+ families actually had a decrease in their tax bill, while only 2% of the 3 families. Now, 13% is actually a fairly sizable percentage for single families to go down in their tax bill. 0 to 5% increase is really where you would see the norm. When our existing properties are going up 2.5%, 2.6%, that's where you'd see the bulk of them. And in a large part, single family condominium and two-family, that's what you see. Exceptions are the three-family, because most of them are skewed toward large increases, and four-family, because most of the properties are skewed toward decreases. And then the final column shows the percentage of the properties that increased by over 5%. That's single families, that's a high percentage, 42%. Again, that's reflective of the strength in the single family home sector. And in general, higher priced properties did better this year. You'll start to see that on the next chart when I do some neighborhood analysis. So I skip to that chart right now. What I did was I took a look at some random streets. I needed a minimum sample size of 3 houses for each particular category to have any meaningful analysis. But if you look at single family and you see the array that all the single family homes on A Street, for example, the median tax bill change was only 1.45%, but then drop over to Andover Street where it's 5.5%. And you see that in general in the higher priced neighborhoods. Butman Road and same neighborhood. And you see the lower percentage increases and generally in the more modestly priced neighborhoods. That's fairly standard throughout each of the subcategories, except that 3 families pretty much anywhere in the city went up significantly. And for the most part, 2 families in most parts of the city went down. But again, Belvedere is another situation where the 2 families may be in a higher price range and they actually did well. But this chart really highlights the neighborhood variability that goes with assessing from year to year.
Is there a reason why my street is the highest on that?
Because people want to live on that street because,
I'm not very popular with my neighbors, I'll tell you right now, but
Well, when they go to sell, you will be.
they don't want to leave.
That concludes the analysis of the tax bills. A couple of weeks ago, we distributed the second quarter analysis, and I think in general, if I can summarize the analysis, the general fund is still trending positive. There are a few worrisome areas. Snow and ice obviously is one of them on the expenditure side. We seem to be doing fairly well on local receipts. However, we expect that positive variance will erode throughout the year because some of that has to do with timing. We've received some receipts earlier than normal. Taxes seem to be coming in fairly steadily, and there have been no changes to state aid, so all the revenue is on track. Most of the expenses are on track. Our enterprise funds are doing well. Water and wastewater in particular are the revenues are doing well. One update though, my original analysis said that the parking was doing extremely well. It is still doing well, but I caution that as we move to the third quarter analysis, the snow may have some effect. The ability to move snow, and I know that the council just approved a critical piece of equipment, but the ability to move snow away from the meters directly affects the meter revenue and the ticketing revenue. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of that positive variance, again, we're kind of regressing toward the mean in the third quarter. We have yet to see that. And I'll take any questions on that analysis or any questions on general operations. I think I'm equipped to handle those right now.
Okay, good. Maybe you could just jump back. Tax bills, does any member of the subcommittee or member of the council, Councilman Donta, have any questions? And Council Martin.
Well, one of the things is, this is probably very accurate given the assessments. My concern is with the underlying assessments for things like the 3 families, that when I looked at the sales for 2009, which these assessments are mainly based on, I didn't see any significant deviation in 3 families from others that would account for that change in assessments, which would then translate into a change in higher tax bills. And I know I did that analysis and gave it to the administration earlier, so that's still a concern that I have, is that I don't see the justification for some of these larger shifts, and I still have that concern.
Okay, I actually passed that on to the Chief Assessor, Sue LeMay, and she did some analysis on that. I don't believe she has written a report yet, but I will get that for you at a subsequent meeting. She did identify some very specific areas where your data deviated from the data that she was able to use as arm's length transactions. There were some arm's length, non-arm's length transactions that needed to be removed from the analysis per DOR regulations. I'll have her complete that report and send it up through the manager's office.
Yeah, that's understandable, since I didn't know from the data which ones were arm's length and which ones weren't. But even still, I didn't see a significant enough deviation, even if you removed half of them. But still, when we get that report, then we'll have a better idea of what's going on, and maybe it can be corrected for a future year.
Council Martin.
Thank you. We use Mr. Moses, an outside vendor, right, to do the assessments every 3 years? Or
We use an outside vendor to help with the reval every 3 years, but they don't do every property, and most of the properties are done in-house. They particularly work with personal property accounts, getting lists and measures from businesses. And they do assist with some of the larger, more complex properties.
all right, because this seems to come up at least every 3 years, but and particularly in times of declining value, I think people are sensitive to it. So, and I know there's sort of a formula methodology that the vendor uses, and maybe now we do that in-house, but it's not well understood, and it's not easily explained either, at least in the years I've been here, and I couldn't explain it to somebody else. One thing I think is important to keep in mind is these values are values relative to other values. So even though if you have a single-family house, it doesn't feel like your house is really escalating in value, but if it's just holding its value, it's doing much better compared to some other classes of property in other neighborhoods. So I think that's an important point for folks to keep in mind. I'd welcome any sort of shorthand summary the vendor would be able to provide, so that we might be better able to explain the process to people, because I don't feel informed enough about their statistical model to be able to explain that to others. But I do think, this notion of, the values are relative to other values. So it's a sometimes small consolation to say to somebody, you could be worse off, you could be him, but that doesn't necessarily make you feel good. If you're worse off than you were, your house is worth less, or it just hasn't gained. But if it's holding its value, that may be why your taxes went up more than someone else whose property actually decreased in value, or decreased in value more.
Right. There are several important pieces that you hinted at. The first of which is the relationship between commercial and industrial and all residential properties. It's very conceivable that properties throughout the city go down in value, yet some bills go up and others go down because of the relative strength of the type of property. Then once you separate the commercial and industrial from the residential, within those classes, there may also be other variations. For example, the relative attractiveness of income residential property versus owner-occupied residential property, or particular types of commercial properties that may have more difficulty being leased. For example, it's not unique to Lowell, but throughout the Commonwealth and the United States, manufacturing has had a difficult time. Industrial properties have tended not to maintain their value as well as commercial office properties throughout the country. That said, there are actually, the models all go back, like Councilor Mendoza says, to sales. But those models try to determine the characteristics of each property that contribute to those sales. You may have times where larger homes are more attractive than smaller homes. There may be other times when smaller homes are more attractive. That may be a demographic trend based on family size, could be economy. There are other things that the assessors look at. There's a condition index for each property. In general, buildings that are better maintained hold their value better. So somebody who puts a lot of effort into their house to make it look good, maybe to have vegetation around that's attractive, and trees and shrubberies, nice paint, they tend to get a higher tax bill because their properties are more attractive and they generally generate higher prices. All these factors are in the mix.
If I could, one other point, I appreciate that. And someone complained to me, so I said I would pass this along. You can respond or not. But, you know, this is a perennial problem we have. If your taxes are going up, you will have underpaid likely the first two preliminary bills, so that the actual increase in your taxes, you know, is the impact is magnified. I had somebody who understood that phenomenon and, you know, went to, I guess, the tax collector's office to get a copy of the bills to be able to demonstrate. It was actually his father's bill, and he was going to be able to demonstrate that to him. So, but then I also asked for what the estimate would be for the upcoming July, figuring it would go back down, because these are inflated payments for the next two because they're higher. And he had to fill out a form, was going to be charged a fee, and we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. So, I mean, it seemed like an imposition on somebody who's actually kind of, you know, on the side of the city, trying to, you know, get some information to explain this to, you know, an older person who didn't quite get it, but he clearly got it, but was not getting any cooperation. So, and what's our policy about fees and things? I mean, is it really that hard to generate these things? You know, he was under the impression if you just hit print, you could have given him the document, or someone at the desk could have given him what he was looking for.
Well, we have a fee schedule that's been in place for years,
We do.
and we've adhered to that. That said, some of the requests are fairly routine. Unfortunately, many of the requests, particularly around this time of the year, wind up being somewhat difficult to comply with. For example, the most common request right now is, how much did I pay in taxes? How much did I pay in excise taxes? Because people are trying to fill out their own income tax returns. That on the surface should be easy. You press a button and the information comes out. But the trouble is, properties change hands, and unlike, let's say, a bank or a credit card company, where if you have an account, that's your account, and when you change, that's closed out. Well, properties exist, and they continue to exist no matter who owns them. So when you're getting a report like that, somebody has to go into the system and make sure that that property hasn't changed hands, and if so, adjust for potential payments, because the consequences are very real if we're giving out information that may not be correct. Somebody's relying on that information for their own income taxes. So that can be very, very time consuming, and unfortunately, it occurs in our busiest time of the year, when excise tax bills go out and when the first quarter tax bills are due, and the third quarter, and we're trying to get the fourth quarter tax bills out. So that's why that fee is in place.
Having said that, it does seem that the request that was being made was pretty simple. It was just a matter of, what was the total tax, and then for the year, and for that property, and then,
Well,
So-
I'm not sure, do we know today, do I know today what my estimated tax bill is going to be in August?
Well,
Is that something?
okay.
you could-
And-
yes and no. But,
Yeah, we're actually addressing that right now, and over the last several years. The calculations are very simple. Your first two bills equal the average bill from the prior year,
Okay.
and then the next two bills are the actual. We have the ability within Mass General Law, and we will be doing this next year, of increasing those first two estimated bills by 2.5%. By doing that, that will make those first two bills higher, but it will even out the flow, so you won't see two very low bills, two higher bills, and then come back down. It's not going to make it perfect, but it's going to make it much more even.
I had the same issue with a taxpayer that was looking at their third quarter bill, their second quarter bill, and then comparing it to their third quarter bill, and of course, it did show the increase. When I went back and worked with him on what had happened over the past 7 years with that property, his tax bill in the first quarter was always a drop from what he had paid in the fourth quarter,
Right.
because it dropped back to the average
Right.
of the entire year. And I did note that he never called to indicate that his tax bill had dropped, but then it goes up in the third quarter. So this smoothing out will address some of that.
So it's going to drop back to the average plus 2.5%.
Right, which is,
But that may not be calculated in the system today.
no, but if that individual in the system today was to look at it, he knows what he pays the first quarter and the second quarter already, and what his third quarter bill and the fourth quarter bill is the same thing. Totals that up, divides by 4, he'll get the, what he'll be paying, what he would be paying, but now it'll just be that adjustment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome. Council Mercia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the city manager, Tom. It seems that every year we tend to go up the 2.5% as governed by law that you can, and I'm always concerned about the levy limit, and it seems like we're getting up closer to it.
No, we've stayed about $5 million below it.
So
Yeah,
if we
from-
go up
since 2006.
if we go up 2.5% again, do we then have only 2.5 million left?
No,
Or-
it still stays at the 5.
No, the levy limit increases 2.5% every year. So
Okay.
if we go up 2.5%, we never catch up to it.
Okay, that makes me feel better. All right.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the tax bills, we're all set. Other item that Mr. Moses touched on was the second quarter financial review. Members have questions on that report that was recently released? I just have one question, Mr. Moses. And second paragraph, on the third paragraph, you refer to some local receipts are outperforming, particularly payment in lieu of taxes. I'm curious what some of those may be.
We've actually got one payment ahead of schedule, that's why. 137.5 from Lenergia.
Okay, so it came ahead of time,
Right,
not
right.
necessarily additional
Right.
payment.
That's
in lieu of
why, as we did our forecast, we really didn't deviate from the original budget.
tax. Okay. That's the only other question. You had given a good recap of this report, so if there's nothing further, Councilor Mercia?
Well, there was something further. Are we not going to discuss the impact that the governor's budget has on us? For example, we're $1.6 million less into the city. What impact does that have on this city? I just thought,
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to get to that as well. So second quarter questions on this report, Councilor Martin?
Just one about the parking, and you cautioned about parking. I heard someone on the radio this week saying, geez, there seems to be an awful lot of meters broken and bagged now. I assume that's not because the meters are broken. I assume they're bagged because you can't pass the street if you have parked cars at both sides, right? So I've noticed on some streets, we've taken all the meters out of service on one side. And I think, is that your concern about revenue?
That's one of the concerns, yes. The other concern, obviously, is downtown. While the snowbanks are there, you can't even get to the meters.
Right. So is that a temporary thing? Are we
Oh,
going
it's
to
a
try another removal?
It's temporary, for sure. The
Well,
other
okay.
aspect.
Yeah, I know it's till April. I've solved every snow complaint I've ever got as a counselor. Just, give me a couple of months. But how temporary,
I think in the next few weeks, I think we'll have everything clear.
We're looking at potentially another snow removal operation, but that's a challenge, and I'm hoping that maybe we're still hoping that new piece of equipment comes in within the next week or so, and we might be able to get that down there to help us out with some of that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moses, did you want to proceed with the next item?
Sure.
I did look through my folder. There are a couple Councilor Mendonça had referred. One was, and I don't know if we'll get it tonight, but we assess values as well as the free cash and stabilization.
Well, the free cash was certified as 1.348, which was great, and we used $100,000 of it to put to good use, and move the rest to the stabilization fund, which is strategic in a number of ways. Number one, by having the funds there rather than sitting in free cash, they don't go away at the end of the year. They remain with you. So if there were an emergency, you could access those funds even prior to certification of free cash. It is more difficult to appropriate from there. It requires a 2/3 vote rather than a simple majority from free cash, but it's intended to be that way. It's not intended to be easy to use your reserves. Our enterprise funds also had their fund balances approved. I believe parking was somewhere around $700,000, which is healthy for them. They finished the year nicely. Wastewater had some deferred debt service. They didn't issue as much debt as they anticipated. Plus, they did well with revenues last year. So that was a very nice surprise at over $10 million. The water department was somewhat disappointing. It was about a negative $100,000. It's a brand-new enterprise fund. The revenues are up this year, and the council did approve a rate increase that will eliminate that deficit at the end of this year. So that will be taken care of, but that's operating at a very thin margin at this point.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe the stabilization, I don't know if we touched upon the stabilization, that's up to about $1.8 million now, which is, you know, I think, looking back, there hasn't been anything in that stabilization fund really. I think there was $30,000 back in 1992, and it's remained that way until 2010. So 2009, 2010. So we were able to, you know, we've been able to make that progress, and that's an issue that's been noted in our credit rating reports by Moody's and Standard & Poor's. It's certainly something that the administration has flagged, and I know that members of the council have flagged that we need to get those reserves up. And in the long run, it saves us money because it will result in better interest rates for the city, and it's a sign of our overall financial stability, which also has benefits from an economic development perspective. As businesses and developers look to locate or build in the city, they look for a stable financial condition. And you know, you contrast Lowell with some of our other peer communities that are in less positive financial shape. You can see that with the level of investment that people are willing to make in those cities. So it's been a priority of ours that we build up those reserves, and it continues to be a priority. Perhaps I'll just wander off into fiscal year 12. Councilor Mercier asked the question regarding the, unless I've missed something that Mr. Chairman, is there anything else on fiscal year? Okay. The governor's budget that was submitted does show a $1.6 million reduction in general local aid. That's a little bit above, I'd say, what we had anticipated initially. On the positive side, it does show the governor's budget does provide for a fairly large increase in our Chapter 70 money. Chapter 70, which we had anticipated dropping by about 5%, actually goes up by $7 million. That's very good news for the school department. It closes, as you recall, the school department had projected, based upon their existing level of services, that they would go up to, they would have about a $9 million shortfall. That doesn't mean they'd actually see their budget cut by $9 million, just like a couple years ago they indicated that there was a $7 million cut, but their actual budget went up that year. It isn't an actual reduction in revenue for them. It's just that it's less than what they believe they need to continue their services. This year, they had anticipated that $9 million problem, the $7 million plus the $4.8 million that they have in stimulus money that they held on to means that they've closed that $9 million problem, and now they have a little bit of money left over to do perhaps some other things with. And I know they'll be working on what their plan will be for that. With regards to the $1.6 million issue, that is clearly going to have an impact on us. It changes our projections for next year. It is a moving target in terms of our projections as we fine-tune information. We do those projections at the 5 years out, conceivably, but they were updated constantly. And so the fiscal year 2012 budget forecast has been based upon information that we had back in the summer. As we get farther into it, we get better information regarding local aid, we get better information regarding new growth, we get better information regarding our health insurance costs, for instance. We can kind of tweak that down or sometimes it has to go up. Certainly, the $1.6 million does indicate that it's going to have to, that it's gotten a little bit worse for us. On the positive side, we are making progress with our unions, I believe, and our retirees on trying to do something about health insurance. And if we're not successful in that effort, the governor's filed legislation that will give us some plan design powers. That has not been passed yet. The Speaker of the House has indicated the House is in support of doing something about plan design. We're still waiting to hear what the Senate President and the Senate might be interested in doing along those lines. But I do think that with plan design powers and some better health insurance numbers coming in, we can see some opportunities there to close that $1.6 million gap to some extent. And that's certainly positive for us. We're also seeing some of the progress being made with the Amoresco project. The utility costs are trending lower in a number of buildings that will enable us, they're providing us positive financial condition for fiscal year 11, the year we're in, but it's also going to help us for fiscal year 12 in terms of helping to close down that gap. We're in the middle of negotiating with all of our unions right now, and obviously we're taking a firm, hard line with our unions, looking for cost savings, but also being very realistic in our ability or inability to provide much in the way of any compensation increases. So, we're working hard right now with departments. The budgets manuals are in the hands of the departments, or the budget materials, and we will come to the City Council in May or June with a balanced budget. And we're hopeful that we can do that in a way that has minimal impact on services, and again, minimal, if and hopefully no reduction in staffing. Do you want to, Moses?
I'd like to add one thing. Since I responded to Councilors Caulfield and Broderick's motion about 2012 and local aid cuts, there's been another development. There's a draft now of the federal budget, and that presents some challenges for us. Number one, the community development block grant money, which won't really affect our budget, but will affect quite a bit what we can do for the city in terms of spending money in the community. But another aspect, the police department depends quite a bit on federal grant money to fund officers on the street. There's the potential for that to be cut fairly significantly. There are one of two actions we can take to mitigate that, neither of which are great. You can reduce the number of officers, or you can bring them, keep them, but bring them onto the city budget funded out of taxes. That's going to be a big challenge in 2012.
Do you have any idea how many officers that might be affecting, or a dollar figure?
At this point, no. And
how many officers do we have that are grant funded?
well, we have not tied the budget any longer to specific officers, but we tally up the outside funding. I don't have that with me, but I know it's in excess of $1 million.
So, right, so if you work off of that, it's somewhat, potentially 20 officers that are affected by that. But we do have some funding that takes us part of the way there, and so it's a challenge for us is to close that out.
And the aid's not going away completely. It will be reduced.
Council Broderick, then Council Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess maybe for Tom, you just mentioned the Amoresco. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Manager, you mentioned Amoresco, and that we're realizing some savings now. That savings is supposed to pay for the cost of the improvements in the contract. Are you indicating that the savings is going to be greater than the cost, or does that have to go separate and be kind of saved in case there's a fall off in the savings? I guess what I'm wondering is this going to be a savings that we realize in the budget, or do we need to kind of put this aside and designate it for the cost of, what was it, 21.5 million for the improvements?
I think it's a combination of a couple of things, and obviously we want to be conscious of any debt service costs are going to come a little bit later. Maybe the better way to answer is this: it comes in two ways. We're actually we think we're picking up some savings in excess of what was projected. That's all very positive. The other is there's a lag. The savings, you change the heating system, that makes savings immediately. Debt service, there's a year lag with when that's due, so we benefit from that a little bit.
All right, and my follow-up question is the intent that we're going to use this money to fund the budget? Because if the debt service is going to catch up, are we going to run into that, one-time, almost like a one-time fund use to fund a budget?
Conceivably, you could end up with that issue, 20 years down the road. So we need to be conscious of that for the 20 years down. But
Okay. You might not be here then.
I probably won't be here then, so if you can remind the next manager.
Sure. The one other question I had was school funding. If it's going to increase, what, if any, impact does that have on our obligation to fund the schools? If there is a direct correlation, some folks have asked me that. If we're short 1.6 and they're getting more, does that mean that the ratios or our contribution will be different? Put you on the spot, huh?
It could change. Some of it depends on enrollment. If enrollment goes down, but I expect that in fiscal 12, our obligation will be fairly stable. Okay, it's hard to say dollar for dollar, but I don't think it's going to move that much. It obviously goes up by the amount of aid Chapter 70 goes up. We get that money, we have to spend it on the schools.
Right, but that's...
And a cut in aid may lower our cost, but on the other side, on the assessment side of the cherry sheet, our assessment for charter school has gone down, and that money goes towards satisfying that net school spending requirement, so they somewhat offset one another.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Council Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a very good topic, well discussed. And whether it's the White House or Beacon Hill, federal and state leaders are talking about some serious cuts. And those cuts will certainly affect cities like Lowell and the towns throughout the state. Tom brought up the fact on the cuts on the CDBG funding. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a drastic cuts to the city, because Mr. Manager and the council knows whether it's the nonprofits or going into a neighborhood, rebuilding streets, roads, sidewalks, and so forth, that money's not going to be there. And President Obama is indicating he wants to cut heating aid to the poor. And it's going to be a huge debate in Washington. There's no doubt about it. And the Republican side of the aisle, they want more cuts, and they now have the majority in Washington. Governor Patrick, he has to cut $1.5 billion out of his budget. But we all do know what he's proposing and what the legislature presents is two different stories. We all know that. And a $1.6 million cut, I think that's realistic to this city. Mm-hmm. The CDBG cuts, $1.6 million cuts, we better start tightening our belts. And Chapter 90 money, Mr. Manager, I don't see that on this chart here. Has that been indicated that there'll be cuts there too?
No, actually, the governor has indicated he's going to increase Chapter 90 money.
Increase?
Right.
Well, the infrastructure throughout the country and the state is deplorable.
Right.
Actually, it's disgraceful, disgraceful. And President Obama brought out his new budget. It's in the trillions, and Washington's got their hands cut off for them, but I think we have to, have to. And you know, you say a $1.6 million budget we can get through, that's a lot of money when you're not getting the other assistance on the community development, block grant funding and so forth. And I don't know what the picture holds for us. I really don't. And collectively, we all have to do due diligence, tighten our belts, and watch every single dime and penny that's spent in this city. And I'm happy to hear that the education budget is going to increase. They have taken a beating over the last 2 years. Serious, serious cuts. Some of the programs in the school department no longer exist. And they're just getting by. So I'm happy to hear that that's going to be increased in the funding.
Well, again, that's the governor's proposal, and
Right. But once again, we all know that that's
right.
It's not cast in stone.
And the other point I would make, you know, is that, and clearly the school department has taken a hit, but in terms of actual total revenue cut, the school department actually has taken less of a hit than the remainder of city government. The city government has taken.
Well, I know in 2008 they had an $8 million cut. In 2009, I think they had a $7 million cut.
Again, that's a cutoff of what they would like.
Right.
That
And-
wasn't a cutoff of their prior year budget.
And another thing I want to point out here, there's no stimulus money coming from anyone.
Right.
That's gone,
That's right.
gone. So I think what Washington is saying and what Beacon Hill is saying, everyone fend for yourself and do the best you can, tighten your belt, and we better do that.
Okay, Councilman Dancer, and then we'll wrap up. this meeting.
Yeah, it may have been answered in passing, but not directly in your report. Last week, I asked a question about the charter school tuition assessment. And, I mean, if you look here in the tables you provided for 2011, you can see, looking back to the previous year, that the assessments have gone down by $2 million, mainly that charter school charge. And then I can see further down below, my question was, who does it impact the most, the schools or the city? I'm not sure which budget it was coming out of, but you have the change here under school-related. And if you do what you have here for net school-related, that means that they're going to have just shy of $9 million more available to them from Chapter 70 funds than they had the previous year. So because of the two things combined, even though Chapter 70 is only going up $7 million or so, the decrease in the tuition assessment adds to what's left available to them, I think.
Right. If you think about it, it is school-related. It does affect our net school spending, so we're going to be required to spend more on our own schools. That $1.6 million reduction is directly the result of kids who were once in the charter school being transferred back into our school system. So the money that was going out to the charter school through the cherry sheet assessment will be funded within our school budget. Now, our ability to increase funds in the school budget is non-existent. We are above the net school spending minimum, so we believe that the school system can absorb that and we can still meet net school spending. But there is pressure on both sides, both the city and the school, to make do with this. The school has more kids, more expenses, and while we don't have to pay these funds out, we have other obligations as well.
Yeah, I mean, cautioning everyone that this is just based on the governor's numbers, which are really the numbers we get in the end. They may go up or down. I'll just also comment that even though they're cutting local aid, the state budget is going from $28 billion to 30 billion. So they're actually going up. And obviously, they have costs that go up with them, but it's still a larger budget that they have. They just happen to be cutting local aid as a decision in the budget process.
Well, if I may, and it's sort of to play off, Councilor, what you were just mentioning, but also speaking to Councilor Caulfield's point regarding the cuts that are taking place. Just some interesting numbers. School aid, in 1990, school aid to the city of Lowell was roughly $30 million. This year, next year, it's scheduled to be up at about $119 million. Right. So it's gone up some, $90 million. The non-school aid in 1990 was $22 million. In fiscal year 12, it's going to be $20 million. We have actually, over 22 years, lost $2 million in general local aid, while school aid has gone up by $90 million. So just give some sense of where and it's understandable, the state government has decided to put its money in education, but the other funding for local government has dropped we're below now where we were in 1990.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilor Caulfield?
Mr. Manager, you know, and we all know, that was the educational reform
That's correct.
passed by the legislature. And thank God it did, because it improved the school system and the education system. And look at all the new schools and everything we built.
And that's excluding the school building
I know
assistance.
that, but
Right.
education was taking a back seat for a long time.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I think we've gotten through, or we discussed everything that was referred to this Finance Subcommittee. I know there was a motion on snow and ice. I think that's going to be a longer discussion, or Mr.
Just to give
Manager?
an update, we're at about $1.5 million over where we, over our budget at this point. Last year, if you recall, we ended the year $2.3 million over. So we're,
Mr. Moses, the report
hopeful.
indicated we budgeted, was it approximately 490,000?
650.
Okay,
We've been trying to inch that up each year, and we
okay.
need to move that up clearly more, but it's, so.
Okay.
One last question.
Councilor Caulfield?
Just
one
on the
last
snow
question?
and ice removal, last week I asked this question, I just wonder if you followed through, Mr. Manager. Did you contact your colleagues, the mayors?
I have been in touch with the Mass Municipal Association
See if
to,
there's any federal funding out there for the 7 feet of snow we received?
I did contact the Mass Municipal Association. They're working on that, so we're working jointly with all of our peer communities, our cities and towns on that issue, yes.
Okay,
But as councilors, you yourself pointed out earlier on, the situation in Washington is very dire, and
There's 2 things they can say, yes and no, and it don't hurt us to ask.
Okay, thank you. With this, if there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn by
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Councilor Mendonça, seconded by Councilor Broderick. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? So ordered. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.